e viva, il reggimento, e viva, il corpo degli Alpi.
I gauged my war experience at the time in matters of, let's say, feet and seconds, rather than saying miles or days, because you never knew from second to second what you would survive. And 2 feet away or 3 feet away, one of your buddies might have been shot. And so I could go run into a clearing, be safe, and 2 seconds later, the fellow following me would try the same tactic and be shot. Just happened to be in the open fire. So life was, as I say, a matter of seconds and a matter of feet. And that's the way we gauged it. And sometimes I get philosophical about this, and when I talk to the grandkids, I say, you wouldn't be here with your grandma and grandpa, because I said there are a lot of guys that I was in the war with who lost their lives.
Well, I will say this, I never knew whether I was a coward or a hero, and I found out I was neither. I found out that, when you're under stress, you deal with it. But I wasn't a hero, because I don't think there really are heroes. I think there's lucky and unlucky guys, and some do more than others. But I felt I did what I was asked.
We were the tops. We were the kids. That's what they called us, special boot troops. Yeah, we were proud of our uniforms. We still are proud of our uniforms. We're proud of going uphill, going to D series and all that. You bet. So I went to down at Fort Benning, training down there for communication for about 2 months, and then I went back up to Hale. But no, we're the best.
We didn't know what we were going to expect. But one thing I noticed coming into the 87th, I noticed something different about the boys, about the young men. I can remember going through the sand dunes, and the boys were all singing. Yes, singing some of those songs. And I says, what kind of an outfit is this? It's so different from basic training when we wanted to kill probably the sergeant. And it was so beautiful. I says, oh my, and I could tell most of them were Easterners. And one thing that in those years, for me, we noticed prejudice or prejudice. And those boys didn't have it. I was just like anybody else.
Pearl Harbor Day, I worked for Western Union on Home Point in the Bronx, and I got a call, we need you at the office. Nobody knew what was really going on, and I wound up delivering telegrams to report back to your base. And at that time, I was making 30 cents an hour for Western Union, and I helped my father in a candy store, so I worked at night, 4 to 8. But that Sunday, I delivered telegrams as they came in all over, report back to your base. And I said to another guy, look, I'm wearing a uniform, and it won't be long now, I'll be changing.
Well, I went in a year before the 87th was formed with the 15th Infantry Ski Patrol, and I spent about 6 weeks with them. We trained and tested equipment and hiked from Snoqualmie Pass to Mount Rainier over a week, and with sleeping with shelter halves, and it was a really good rough trip.
They were sociable in the 10th. It made a big difference. I think I would say probably they were a heck of a lot more educated. I was but the dummy, high school. Most of them were either a couple of years of college or something like that, and a lot of them come from the East, which is college anyway. That's where the skiers come from.
The comradeship and fellowship we had in the 10th Mountain Division certainly was wonderful, and all I can say is, being even a naturalized citizen, that I was accepted as a full-fledged American, and I never got any bad reaction of that I came from the other side, which I think was, I appreciated it, and I think also that all my fellow soldiers who were with me, they also realized that I was not one of the bad guys.
Well, we'll just go around here. Thank you. Order! Horse! Parade! Rest! Memorial Day is a day set apart by our country to honor the service and sacrifices of the men and women of the U.S. Armed Forces. America has been a democratic republic since our beginning. And ever since, Americans have been willing to fight and die to preserve this way of life. More than 1 million Americans have fallen in battle, the majority here in Europe in the last century's devastating world wars. Many today ask whether war is ever justified. Is it ever moral? The men and women buried here before us knew the answer to that question. In the face of a brutal fascist dictator who had engulfed Europe in flames of death and destruction and persecution, they knew that evil had to be defeated so that liberty could triumph. They knew that defeating that evil would exact the life of some, the limbs of others, the idealist dreams of most. They also knew it was necessary to return freedom and the rule of law to our friends in Europe. It is also fitting today that we pay respects to the 25 million living veterans in America who have served in America's armed forces, and the 2.5 million volunteers serving in today's armed forces, the active and reserves. The young people of the United States who make up our armed forces are role models. They are carrying on the tradition of patriotism and free choice that has sustained our nation for over 200 years. Time and again, after our brave warriors have gone into a foreign land to defeat an enemy and help rebuild a nation, the only thing that we have ever asked for were small plots of ground such as this one here today, where we can bury our dead. The people buried here are true heroes, and we should never fail to honor them and thank them. You are doing that by your presence here today.
As we enter this beautifully kept sacred cemetery and memorial, there's a serenity, but beneath that quiet calm lie those ever-present memories. And if you stare deeply at the grave markers and through them, looking to the past, images emerge. Images of soldiers coming from landing craft in gliders, by parachute across beaches and bluffs, through forests and over mountains, on foot, in jeeps, in tanks. Courageous pilots and aircrew in early aircraft, soldiers, sailors, airmen and Marines, cold, wet, mud and snow, never stopping, always advancing, even at tragically high cost. You sense the pride, the duty, the honor, all unfortunately mixed with that deep sense of loss. It is for this reason that today, Memorial Day, we must remember, we cannot forget the sacrifices that men and women like these made defending our freedom and the freedom of many.
In all, 975 of the 10th Mountain Division were killed in action in Italy. Their faces are now but memories. The echo of their laughter has faded into the distant past, but we still remember them in a way that only men who trained and fought together can remember. As you wander among these grave sites this morning, you will find familiar names etched on the headstones of that march. The platoon after silent platoon across this peaceful valley. Maybe one will be a buddy when you endured these hardships of D-Series, or another, a friend who accompanied you on a weekend pass to Leadville, to Denver, to Austin, or on a rest leave to Rome. Perhaps you will see a name of a fellow trooper who huddled in the same foxhole that you were to escape the enemy fire.
Colonel Rolfe called me in and told me to go pick out 150 ski instructors and go down to Camp Carson, and we were supposed to finish up all the manuals on skiing and climbing and go pick out the ski and climbing areas at Camp Hale while they were building it. So it was pretty nice duty and kind of a break.
We call them the torture boards, and there was 6 foot 4 wood, and it's like a 2x4 on your foot in the beginning. And the problem, they didn't have breakaway bindings at the time. If your foot goes, you go where the ski goes. If it goes to the right, your whole ankle turns to the right. And if you fall and you snap, that's how you break. On the modern day ski, they have it comes right out of your thing, and you save yourself. And then you do the manual arms, the right face, and you put the ski in the snow, and you do the pole, and you turn around and lift it. It's a whole routine. And you start out with the snow plow, then the stem turn, and then the Christie. And the qualification was a Cooper Hill. You had to go down, all the way down. You had guys checking you out to see how good you were. And the reason I really learned to ski, I got tired of falling.
This was like in about December of '43. We're standing out, and Reveille, like 5 o'clock in the morning, and you're standing out there freezing, and it's kind of stormy and everything, and we were just suffering. So I said, "Give me liberty or give me death." And the sergeant said, "Who said that?" And I said, "Well, I think it was Patrick Henry." But all the guys laughed, but the sergeant didn't really care for that at all.
Describe what D-Series was like.
Well, we went up there and started, see, this was like mock warfare. So we had, a couple of different teams there, and one was trying to attack the other, and they had referees out there. And they determined whether you had attacked successfully against the other group. And if you maneuvered around and surprised them or something, then the referees would give you points like you actually did something to to kind of either capture them or kill them or do something. So that's the way that worked. Now, there's all these referees constantly roaming around, and these were just kind of some of the expert people from mountain training group and things like that. They were referees. The mountain training group was the people they assembled that were the best skiers and mountaineers in the world. I mean, God, we had, practically every good skier in the United States, it seemed like to me. And it's fun to meet those guys.
At first, of course, they gave us basic training. That wasn't too bad. But then once we were through basic training, we spent a lot of time in the field. We probably went out every Monday and came back Thursday or Friday. And at that time, you spend most of it walking and climbing. And then later when the snows came, you were going out on your skis, and you weren't skiing downhill. You were marching, you were climbing on skis. And the worst part of it was the rucksack. It was heavy. When they sing 90 pounds of rucksack, they weren't kidding, because you had everything you needed for a week, maybe 2 weeks. And that the rack used to cut into your hips, believe me. So that by the time you were finished during the day, you were tired.
Because I was Italian and I had only been in the country less than 5 years, I was not a citizen. I was classified as the enemy. Because they don't know the difference between ethnicity and loyalty. At the time, they didn't know. It's behind their comprehension.
I like that.
Oh, there's John.
We came down, after we were loaded, we came out early at night and went down south into the San Diego area, where we took some training in amphibious training, coming down with full pack down those rope ladders off of the ships. Then getting into assault boats and heading towards shore. We did that several times. Then we were given a pass for one day, and then we boarded the ships again and headed out to sea. We didn't know where we were going. Then out, after a few days at sea, they said, we are headed for Kiska. I said, and I knew where Kiska was because I've always been a reader. I've always liked to read. So I said, oh, Kiska is being held by the Japanese. And I had already knew that two had been taken. Two was the first island, and the second island was Kiska. The Japanese held both islands. So our purpose was to take that island back from the Japanese. So one of the most memorable moments, you asked me, was one night when they told us, what do you want for breakfast? Why, nobody told us what we wanted for breakfast. They were asking, I said, it reminded me of condemned men in the state of California where they are told, you can eat anything else before they're executed. And that's what it reminded me.
We used to get on to Denver from Camp Hale, and you'd rent a room and go up in the room, and then while they were leaving, they were, they'd bring a coil of rope and rappel out of the window so they didn't have to pay the bill. But that was after a few drinks, But I wasn't involved in that.
It was mighty cold. And one thing I do remember, I was a squad leader at the time. And one of the members of my squad, they woke us up about 1 o'clock to go out and patrol the area. Well, we started out, and it was very icy. The snow was frozen, and we were going along. Oh, great, we could ski. And all of a sudden, he stopped about 10 feet in front of me. He turned around, and he was white as a ghost. Here he was about 3 feet from a precipice. We could have gone off the ledge. We would have fallen about at least 100, 200 feet. And the snow down there was about 10, 15 feet deep. So they never would have found us.
After our training in Colorado, of course, we moved to Texas. As the other fellows probably have told you, we went down to Camp Swift, Texas, and it was an entirely different atmosphere and climate. We hated the hot weather and the muggy weather, but we had to do the training. We did a lot of marching, walking for several miles at a time. And during the time at Camp Swift, our regiments each started a athletic program. They had a baseball team. Each regiment had a baseball team, and they also had a boxing team. So they arranged a 10th Division tournament, and I happened to win the tournament at the welterweight championship of the division.
Marco has just pointed out that we're now in the Reno Valley. At one point, the Route 64 is in the valley of the Reno River, and this river here, the Reno River, is a major feature. It runs right down the right-hand side of the area that our troops were in. The general who planned this part of the Italian campaign was really General Truscott, and in his excellent summary of the battles, he says that if you go north, as you drive along Route 64, when you come to the town of Scylla, where Scylla Creek enters in, you then come under observation from German artillery observers on Mount Belvedere. And from then on, so that the Army could not use Route 64 to get supplies north of Scylla. And we're coming into that fairly soon. And the raison d'etre for the first part of our campaign was to drive the German artillery observers off of Mount Belvedere, where they could see all the way over to Route 64. And as every soldier knows, the Germans had very effective artillery with 88 caliber guns. And but in order to have an effective artillery, you have to have somebody observing where the shells land, so you can correct it. And they had wonderful German spy glasses, field glasses, situated by observers on Mount Belvedere, and they controlled this whole region. So the first mission of the 10th was to drive the German artillery observers off of Mount Belvedere.
As company clerk, how did you engineer your transfer into the 10th?
I wrote this resume, so to speak, and then slipped it under with other papers. The captain had to sign papers every day, about stuff. And then took my paper out, and the major, the battalion had same procedure, regimental. I knew the clerks, so I said, here, I put this in with your other stuff and have the colonel sign it. Had the colonel's signature on it. I knew the secretary to General Patton. This was the 2nd Armored Division. And I told him, here, I want this signed. He got it signed, and in the meantime, I got yellow jaundice from yellow fever shots, along with many others, a bum batch. Ended up in the hospital. And they were getting ready to stage it to go overseas to Africa. The first sergeant called me, a veteran of World War I, and says, how in the hell did you get a transfer to the 87th? And I said, well, I'm very skilled, and they accepted me. And he said, well, we're going overseas, you've been transferred. I sure got well in a hurry.
I was home on furlough, and I got a telegram telling me to come back, but I didn't make it in time. The division had already pulled out, and when I went up into my barracks, everything was gone. And I said, well, what do I do now?
What do you do?
I went out and started walking around, and the lieutenant picked me up and put me in the barracks. And over the next several days, there were 32 of us all together who did not make the boat. So they made a little outfit out of us, called us a casualty detachment. And we ended up bringing over from New Orleans a load of mules, 365 mules on board ship, from New Orleans to Italy, to Naples. 31 days on the water with 365 mules.
made it by myself. It is a picture in, I'm a little bit, in copper, in hammered copper with handmade, and represent the scene of the war of the 14th April, when a lot, very, very much, many people die, and I think that you have to recognize very well the place. We give the gift to the president of the Mountain Division.
Beautiful. Look at this. Casa of the Young, 28 May 2003.
Dicevo prima l'artefice, l'idea è stata nostra. L'artefice di questa splendida opera, prego, Pommelano.
I was Company B of the 86th Regiment. And on February 18th, this mountain, in the darkness, we came up here in the darkness. But I might say that, first of all, we came on the 17th, and we stayed in all these little houses that we saw down there, and we stayed there all day the next day for security purposes. The next night, we come out of the houses, we crossed the river, and we come up the river at the base of the ridge here. And then when the signal was given, we all, the whole 700 of us, emerged on the mountain at the same time. Company A reached the top first, and that's where the war began, with Company A down here. And of course, I was Company B, and I was just down here ways.
How much farther down the ridge were you from
Well,
where?
I was probably 100 yards down, I'm guessing. And but the battle that took place here was really quite fierce. And we lost 21 men on this mountain. And how many wounded? About 40, I think. I think we can check that out. But I feel bad about 21 men. You know, I don't think of them as old men like I have become, but as young boys, flesh and blood. And they were denied all the pleasures of life. So it's a touching situation to me. And I know that I shouldn't be so sentimental, but I cry in a cemetery.
Over here.
Ok? Tieni premuto, Remo, tieni premuto, perché sennò non va.
Where's the Rocco Cornetta? Where's Rocco Cornetta?
Andiamo là, andiamo. Massimo, andiamo alla pari, eh?
Oh, okay.
Video Massimo, tua bocca.
We pushed up over the ridge at that last minute. The Germans were still eating breakfast. They were in their bunks. They had bunk houses in these dugouts. They lived there. They had stoves and everything else. When we finally got up there, and I wasn't one of the first over the ridge. One of our fellas named, in fact, we saw his grave yesterday, Willie Godwin, was the first one of the first ones over. And the Germans got up, once they heard us shouting, they got up and they started running down the other side of the hill, which is a more of a gradual slope. We came up the steep side. The German side is a more gradual side. They started running down through the trees. Willie Godwin chased after them. And of course, unfortunately, they turned around and shot back at him. He was the first casualty. He was killed directly. And anyway, we did push them out. Then we started looking around at the bunkhouses. And I went into this one bunkhouse, and breakfast was still on the table, coffee was there, plates of kippers, cans of kippers were open. They had kippers for breakfast, and this black bread, and they had big pieces of salami that they were having for breakfast, if you can imagine. And of course, we'd been fasting all night, climbing, and in the farmhouses below, we didn't have much to eat, if anything. I was starved, so I crammed myself full of salami and kippers and black bread. Big mistake. Anyway, on the table, I found a Hohner harmonica, and I stuck it in my shirt pocket, my left shirt pocket, along with a little prayer book that the chaplain had given all of us, these little prayer books, and that was also in my pocket too at the time. Well, about an hour later, we're standing around on top of Riva Ridge. Now, we're green troops, right? We're all standing there along the ridge, enjoying this beautiful view. They sneaked up on us to our right flank, up a little bit higher up above the ridge than we were, and started firing down the length of the ridge at us, right straight, which is exactly what they're supposed to do. You always fire down the length of the group that you're attacking. And of course, I'm at the extreme left. Now, we had tried to dig foxholes up there. The ground was frozen, there's lots of snow. And it was not only frozen, but it was also very rocky. And we had very small shovels to break into this crust. So the foxholes were very shallow. We gave up on them fairly quickly. It was very difficult. Maybe about 2 feet, 2.5 feet deep, something like that. Anyway, we're standing there looking at this beautiful, bright, sunny day, and all of a sudden, wham! The next thing I remember was I'm facing the other direction, down on my hands and knees, with my rifle underneath me, and I'm wondering what happened. Had no idea what happened. And but it dawned on me I had been hit. I flattened myself out, and I had to crawl backwards into the foxhole, push myself backwards into it, and a couple of guys were already there. Sergeant Milanowski was standing right next to me with this. Oh, this was a burp gun that I was hit with, a 9mm burp gun. It was a very fast-firing German gun that they had developed. Anyway, this bullet had hit the harmonica, went through, blasted through it, went through the prayer book, and instead of going straight through heart and lungs where your pocket is, it deflected down and stopped down near my spine, where it still is now 60 years later. Yeah, it's still there.
By the way, this is Toriusi, and this is a town that the 87th took. And the rock that you see off to the right over here is the Rocca Ruffino. And I wish I could remember the name of the unit, but I think it was the 86th. They made a bayonet attack up that mountain to the Germans holding the position. Wow. And took it successfully. And the Germans have been with us on some of these trips recently, and they have stories about the American troops attacking, which very much impressed them.
I had a particularly poignant moment just when we went through Torrey Iusi. I was in C of 87, and our two hills were 860 and Torrey Iusi. And an interesting anecdote is I came around the side of a hill running like all get out, everything is going on. There's tremendous noise. As Hugh just mentioned, everything's exploding, machine guns are going, people are hollering, people are hit, medics are running around. I came around this corner and there was a young German soldier, and his stomach was slit right across, and he thought I was going to shoot him, but when a soldier on the opposite side is wounded, he's no longer a threat, so he suddenly becomes someone you're going to help. So I just gave him a drink of water quickly and moved on.
But that's Dallas Bay. As you can see, that's where the troops were. The Germans were all along these ridges as well as the ridges on the other side, so you can see what an exposed position it was. Now I want you to picture yourself in a foxhole up there on Dallas Bay. You're up there for 10 days. You don't get out during daylight at all. You try and get your K rations and your water in at night. You send somebody back to bring water up for the troops. You get your K rations and in it. That's where you're living. And somebody complained, you know, John Embry and I did a book, and I drew a beautiful picture of my foxhole up here on Dallas Bay, and everybody said, that's a damn officer's hole. It looks like it's luxury. Well, if you're sitting around in a mud hole for 12 hours, you can't get out. I mean, you do try and be a little bit creative in what you're doing in there. On this site, theater of the atrocities of the Second World War, Lieutenant Robert Dole, member of the 10th Mountain Division, was seriously wounded while fighting for the freedom of our town.
You know what crampons are? Well, we were probably the only unit in the United States Army that ever used crampons. And we used them on that assault I was just talking about on Monte Spigolino. Well, we had to go over Cornwallis Gully, and we started down at the foot of the mountains near near Lozano in Pistoia, and we went up a valley. We got up on the summit, and we moved down the summit line for a period of maybe, well, we got there at dawn, so we must have been going 5, 6, 8 hours maybe. And we organized a skirmish line on a cornice that overlooked their position. And of course, when they came out, we started firing, and they started firing back, and so we finally knocked off the position. So I threw a hand grenade into the, no, it was a concussion grenade. I threw a concussion grenade into their living quarters. And of course, as you want, it was some years later I was thinking about it, and I said, what we should have done was punched a hole in the roof so they couldn't use it again. But we were young, impressionable, and green, and we didn't.
and the nights are blue. Sto stare che è successo non lo so, che mai fatto non lo so, so soltanto che se te ne vai io morirò. Sono spina e me ne sto nel muro, ma non sei only you. Can make this a change in me? For it's true, you are my destiny. When you hold my hand, I have Romagna mia, lontano da te non si può stare.
Well, we started, I think, late in the evening, and we climbed all night long to get to the top. And when we got to the top, we surprised the Nazis completely. They couldn't believe it that we got up there. You know? So yeah, that was. That turned out well for us because we were able to take that section of Mount Belvedere, you know. I really don't know if there were other parts of the mountain that had to be taken, you know, not only where we went, you know. We were just a patrol of, well, I don't remember how many, maybe about 15 men. We even passed a patrol, you know, and we just stopped and laid down, you know, and they kept on Nazi patrol, and they just kept walking, you know, they didn't hear us. And we had a very good lieutenant. His name was Tismaki, and he was from Norway. Yeah, from Norway. And before we started, he says, you know, we got to surprise them, and we'll be in good shape, you know. So be very quiet, you know. So we obeyed, and it turned out for us. You know.
2 tanks to cross, well, about 4 tanks across the way going up over about 150 yards across in an open field. We were walking in the woods so that we wouldn't step on mines or they couldn't see us, and it was getting awful tiresome. And I looked over and these guys were riding that tank, and man, I wanted to do that. Well, about 5 minutes later, they got a direct hit on the tank, and the guys were riding either blew them off or they jumped off. And of course, we were moving up fast. We couldn't stop, and we kept going. And one of the best meals I ever had, I've told somebody this the other day, maybe I told you. We got up there, my legs would feel like it was ready. We got a 10-minute break, shelling and slept, and I reached in my K rations and I pulled out cheese and crackers, and I can remember today how good that tasted. And I would say that was one of the better meals I'd ever had, even though it was cheese and crackers.
Tim had downhill knee. I just remember all instructions.
Sure was.
Oh, it was beautiful. I think I told you we met him on that IFMS.
Qui sono apparecchi limitati, però si può guardare. Pian piano. Proviamo a tirare.
Dietro lì, vedi
Because I think it's important.
He's going to speak Italian.
It's just like a horn. Just keeps going. I'll get Debbie. For some reason,
What are you talking about? Reading.
Read it. There we go.
Orient to the land. They all saying the same thing at the same time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fede e di amore. Salvaci dal gelo implacabile, dai vortici della tormenta, dall'impeto della valanga. Fa che il nostro piede posi sicuro sulle creste vertiginose, sulle diritte pareti, oltre I crepuscoli.
I don't think that in entering combat, we thought about it in terms of either beating, winning, or losing the odds. We recognized that there were definite dangers, but I think every man in his heart had the feeling that there wasn't a bullet or a shell fragment for him. That it perhaps for someone else, but not for him. And I have a feeling that we went in with that attitude. I think that you have to have some hope in order to be an effective operator in any type of situation. That you have to have a certain amount of hope that you can be successful in it.
On Mount Belvedere, we lost about a third of our medics. At the time, I was working in the first aid station, so I went out as a medic, company medic, picking up what I could find. Then as we moved around, I worked in the aid stations or as a company, wherever I could go. In the States, I'd had training with mules, and I was responsible for getting all the medical equipment up the mountain. It was interesting.
Tell me when you're a medic, what do you do on a regular basis?
Just follow along and somebody yells medic, or you see somebody while you jump in and do your thing. My first casualty was shot through the head and I didn't know what to do. I had training for everything but that. But no, you just, they call medic and you go. I saw so much blood and gore. I was going to go into medicine, but that's how I got into medics. I was taking pre-med at the UW and taking the courses in that, so they automatically put me in the medics. I had no choice. So after all of that, I decided I didn't want to be into medicine. That's too much blood and gore. The night of Belvedere, I went up with an Italian and about 30 mules and all the equipment. battalion was on the front, and I was hanging on to the last mule's tail, dragged me up the mountain. We dumped everything in a big pile. He said, "Arrivederci." He took his mules and he left, and I was stuck. That was a long night. Two-pack. That was called what you'd call a two-pack night.
What happened in that long night?
It just stayed quiet. And when the American troops started coming, I knew the password for that day. And when the troops started coming, I could hear them or sense them, but I didn't dare say anything because they were trigger happy. So I waited till the squads moved past me, and then I sang out with the password. Because I didn't want to get shot going up there.
And see, the Germans are trying to guess where the heck you're going to come from. Are you going to come up from Gazio? Are you going to come up from here? You really don't know. We're on the top of Gorgolesco now, and I thought you could see Belvedere, and we can't. We'll move down this trail to the pasture where we saw the horses, and we'll look back on Belvedere. The last time I was here, it was a barbed wire fence, and you could pull the barbed wire around. Obviously, the landowner doesn't want us to trespass, but when I was talking about the tree, see the oak tree that's just sticking up there in that pasture, that's the tree that we call the Evans-Embry tree that we argue over, and it's in a photograph with C Company coming back up. We went down to get our packs and then came back up online. And I believe I was just over that ridge down there, and I could see there was an American soldier crawling below what then I could recognize was a bunker. So I thought, if he's there, I can go there. So I took off running up to this fellow that was up below this bunker. The last time I was here, I thought I found it, but I think it's just on the other side of the fence and we can't get there. And then moved on over that hill, and that hill, where it's overgrown today, was not. It was barren at the time. And mortar shells started to come in as I began to move across the hill. So I ran to the other side. Somebody popped his head up, and somehow I hit him with my machine pistol, which is a .45 caliber weapon that goes put, 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 put like that. And it ran down and jumped in his trench. And then there was a machine gun firing down. This draw goes down to Gazio Montana. And some of the Germans that had been captured here tried to escape and started to run down this draw. So the two Germans in there had given up, surrendered to me. I took their machine gun and fired on the prisoners trying to escape. I think this level, I don't think it's a trail, I think it is the remnant of a trench that ran around the nose here and off in this direction. And this was clear when I came over the top. A German put his head up, and I fired from a waist like a real Western pistol jockey and somehow hit the guy, and then came down in this trench. And it wraps just enough around the hill so that you can see that little gully, and it was open like the fields. Now you can look across there and see that hill. That hill was not overgrown the way it is now. And when the troops started coming through and I moved out, the Germans gave up. They stood up in their holes and surrendered. And that whole hill, it was all standing up. And I realized what an idiot I was.
Okay. Hugh,
Yes.
when you're doing all this, what were you thinking?
I was mad. I was mad. They'd killed Fisher. That's where anger serves a very useful purpose in our personality makeup, presumably. Sometimes anger is right, sometimes anger is wrong. It's hard to tell the difference. I remember coming back down, and right through here, B Company was ahead of us. As was pointed out today, we were coming up in a single column, following each other by regiment, and B Company was in the lead. They came up in this draw here and took a terrible, terrible beating. I think they were caught by machine gun fire and shells. Then I remember
They were Savage brothers, and one of the Savage brothers, his head was blown open like a watermelon out here. And his brother came by later and said, "That's my brother."
It was our first time in combat for Company K. We went up to the little town of Antani, where we relieved another company of the division. And we were in this village. This was in February. It was probably 3 or 4 feet of snow on the ground. The Germans were on the opposite side of the mountain, which was called simply La Serra, in the town of Pianosanatico. The 1st platoon under Lieutenant Gene Hames was to take the very top of the mountain and offer the left flank protection as the other 3 platoons moved up along the ridge but below where we had moved up. We were up much higher. And the fighting, the shelling started, and sometime, and I don't remember the exact hour, but we were spread out in a single line facing Pianosanatico when down the line came the word Marasco got it, which meant that he was killed. Marasco had volunteered to go on this mission because he was in trouble with the captain and the colonel both. Before we came over to Italy, he had slipped off from Camp Patrick Henry, Virginia to see his wife, his pregnant wife, in Pittsburgh. She was pregnant with this Rob, who accompanied us on this particular trip, about 5 months pregnant. And so he had gone home to see her, and he'd gotten back late. And so he volunteered to go on this raid, hoping to get back in the good graces of the captain and the colonel. So he really didn't have to be here.
We accidentally were in an area with a captain and 2 sergeants and myself. Didn't have the lieutenant colonel at that time. They were both dead. Our replacement was back at headquarters. And we found a section of infantry moving up. Must have been 3,000 or 4,000 Germans moving up with trucks, horses, wagons, supplies. So when I saw that situation, I reviewed this with the captain. I said, my suggestion that we open fire and wipe these people out because they're going to advance and they're going to cause us a lot of problem. He says, well, we have to get authority to do that. I says, I'll give you the authority right now. So we opened up. We had the 10th Mountain Division. The first round we fired went right in the middle of, in one truck, just exploded up in the air. And then we asked for the firing of the full batteries of the 10th Mountain Division. We also added the 105s from the Polish artillery. They added on, and it was just a terrible situation, just explosion, everything else. Then we had to leave there quickly. We couldn't move too far, so we had to bury ourselves in some debris. It was cold. We had leaves, branches. We covered ourselves. All 4 of us were there buried. And these German patrols came after us, naturally. And my hand was sticking out there, and he almost stepped, the German soldier almost stepped on my hand. I know if he would have found us, we would have wiped out. We'd been wiped out.
And where did this whole firing on them occur? Do you remember?
Not. I'm sorry, I can't. I looked at some of the maps right now, and I'm not sure just where it was, but it was a major route coming in. This is probably around River Ridge, around that area. That's the time that we opened fire. And General, not Ruffner, General Hayes contacted me when I went back to headquarters, and he wanted to talk to me. And he says, you had no authorization to open fire, particularly the division and the Polish artillery. I says, sir, the enemy was coming in. We were estimating 4,000 or 5,000 troops. Could you imagine what would happen if they got on a line? We would have lost a lot of good soldiers. He says, I had the responsibility, a quick decision. I reviewed it with the captain. He agreed, and we fired. He walked away.
We jumped off because it was very late, and
we all moved up more or less in a row because we were undetected at that point, so it was safe enough to be in groups and together. Perhaps one of the things I remember most is that we were funneled into an opening in a wall. There was a wall of some sort, either a banking or a stone wall, and we were funneled to an opening in it so that we could continue on up rather than everybody climbing over this wall. And there was a tripwire in this opening, which was very common. Funnel them down and then put a mine in there or a booby trap. And in my group, there were almost 200. And every one of us stepped over that wire and turned to the buddy behind us and watch the wire. Now this is in the middle of the night. And as I say, it must have been 200 men step over that wire because it was not detonated. I did not hear it.
We found a minefield, and it was marked with a little wire about that far off. So our sergeant said, well, Herbert and Bill, you go and look how far. So look at the size of this minefield, he said. So I went up the left-hand side, and Bill went up the right-hand side, and we walked around it. And while this happened, I guess they had spotted Bill, the Germans, so they challenged him. And somehow or other, I don't know how it happened, I answered them in German. Of course, I missed my dialect, you know, there was no way they could tell that if I'm American or not, because I have never lost my dialect. I can, the moment I get off the train or in the car of St. Anton, I speak dialect like the local people. As a matter of fact, most people can't get over it, that I still have that ability to speak it. So anyhow, so then as the German soldier came down towards me, but I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to give away my positions, and he turned around again and went back. And of course, one thing about it, we had to get out of there because by 11 o'clock at night, our artillery was going to bombard this particular area. So we all got out, and after we were halfway down, they said, well, Herbert, you go in the back now. And we have somebody else up front, and then he got lost on the way. So we sat there and watched the bombardment, and when that was all over, we said, okay, now let us get back on the right track, which I did. And then they told me, okay, Schneider, in the back and keep your mouth shut.
At the risk of being a little immodest, I might say that the thing I was most proud of is that I received the Bronze Star in action at Mon Giorgio in a battle there, which required that a German machine gun nest had to be removed. And there was an old expression that we were taught. This is Hansaluf gar nichts kaputt. In German means hands up, we won't shoot. And I said that, and lo and behold, I heard all this noise, and there were probably 5 or 10 of the German soldiers who came out, and it shocked me very much. So that was probably there were many of those similar incidents, but I happen to get credit for that one.
Went through the war and got a little hurt. Made a lot of good friends. There were three of us. One was a Swede, I was a Norwegian, another fellow was a Norwegian. We were all named Rob. And after every engagement, we would look for each other and see if we were okay. And then we'd go back to our foxhole and go ahead. Oh, another thing came to mind. When we went up Belvedere, my recollection is going up in the evening. I don't really remember. And I remember digging a hole and digging as much as I can all night. The next morning I looked out beyond the parapet and there was a booby trap sitting down there. And I said, oh my gosh, somebody's watching over me.
The most difficult thing was move out. Because you're moving from one spot, you never know what's in front of you. That's what I would say was the most difficult. Once you got going, you just kept going and that's it.
What were you thinking when you were moving out into unknown?
Well, it's the unknown. You were thinking, and you had to keep your eyes ahead pretty well because you didn't know. Actually, one of the things that probably scared you the most was one time, you're in the Po Valley, and you're going from hedgerow to hedgerow. There's a row here, and then you got a big section for farm, corn or whatever they're going, and then another set of trees. When you get to the other set of trees, that's when you get a little worried. You saw what's kind of in front on the front lines. So then you start worrying when you get to setting. And this one place, I don't know where it was, a guy jumps out and everybody hit the ground. Rifles pointing at the guy, and fortunately he didn't get shot. But he hollered, "I'm from Iowa." it was comical.
They kept us down. If you think we knew about Weaver Ridge, nobody. They kept what the left hand. In case you get captured by the Germans, you wouldn't know what the hell was going on. They kept you dumb. You just know what was going on in your little section. You take this, and the A squad, B squad, anyhow. And that was one of the reasons I didn't find out about Weaver Ridge till after the war. I didn't know the history. I learned all this stuff, what was going on. I only knew what was going on in my area. And that I can say that for most 10th men. They only knew what was in front of them. It was up to the headquarter guys to know the overall picture.
Our sergeant told me, you know, Cruz, Fred was my partner on the mortar crew. He said, I'm going to separate you and Fred because something might happen and I want to have two crews. So Fred moved to the left, I stayed on the right. And then when this artillery fire started coming in, some rounds hit real close. And I saw Fred and his partner just fold up over the mortar. I said to myself, boy, it could have been me.
Su quei monti che noi andremo, coglieremo le stelle alpine per donarle alle bambine, farle piangere, sospirare, oh la la, e viva il reggimento, e viva il corpo degli alpini, e viva il reggimento, e viva il corpo degli alpini.
I was told to take my squad. I was only a squad leader then.
my squad out and set up a defense out on the point of the ridge. And I just took the men out there and set them up, and in a defensive position, came back and told our lieutenant that it's done, we're all set, and he gave me an award for it.
And there was a guy sitting on his hands and knees with a mortar pack on his back, and we'd been dropping down every once in a while, and I thought, well, I'll go over and help him. So I went over to help him up, and one of the guys said, don't bother, he's dead. He got a direct hit evidently, and he was still on his hands and knees, kind of leaning against this cliff a little bit, and I probably never went hit him, still with his full load of mortars. And of course, as we went up, there was a guy, Spread Eagle, that got hit direct, and it got pretty rough from there on up. As far as, now we were coming through, and I'm trying to find out where we were, but my battalion came through the other two, so we were going through what they had just witnessed, it was pretty devastating, yeah.
You've heard the story of the Band of Brothers, and that applies. I don't think we were fighting for the government or fighting against the Germans. We were fighting to keep our unit together and keep as many kids alive as we could. Just the cohesiveness of the unit is key to anything, and it makes a good military unit if everyone can look at their job is to taking care of their buddy.
Della Torraccio, we worked our way up the mountain, and when we finally got to the top, and it was hard fighting all the way, when we got to the top, we developed our command post, and our platoons dug in because we were very sure that at that night we would have a counterattack. And they were correct. They had a very fierce counterattack. But we dug in, there was snow, it was cold, and we waited, I guess, from the time we finished fighting, which was about 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon, we were able to dig in and wait for the counterattack. Counterattack was preceded by a fierce artillery barrage, so fierce that nobody could get out of the foxholes.
That was good. That was impressive.
Squawking and waving his wings, you know, and my buddy says, "Squawk, you damn fool, you're going to be in the pot in a few days anyway." We both broke out laughing. Kind of broke the tension of the minute.
Yeah. Did you get your chicken?
No, never did get him. We turned him loose. Turned her loose.
Well, the counterattack was so terrible. We were a company of 3 in the communications department, and my one sergeant was in Florence having his hemorrhoids attended to. And the other sergeant was in the foxhole, and the shelling was so traumatic that he refused to come out. And he never, ever came out of the foxhole. And that left just me to do the work all night long. And that's what I did.
Well, nobody else would come out of the foxhole.
Well, they finally came out, but they waited until the shelling got a little bit lighter. And that was maybe around, the shelling started about 8:30 or 9 o'clock, I guess.
Yeah.
And maybe by 10 o'clock, 10:30, you were able to come out of your foxhole. And the shelling went on all night long.
How did you make sure you didn't get shelled?
You don't make sure.
You don't make sure. You don't make sure, Abbie.
You don't know whether
You
the
just keep on
gonna be
hoping.
yours or
hoping.
not.
And then your tool broke and you had a splice with your teeth.
I had pliers, wire cutters, and I lost them because the shell blew me around. And the rest of the night, I was splicing wire with my teeth because I had no other equipment. And
do you guys know maybe what the date of that was?
Yes.
March 2nd. Probably March 2nd.
March 2nd to 5th.
yeah, it must have been around the 2nd.
March the 2nd through the 5th.
Yes. But it was a ferocious battle.
German avevano tirato giù, come si dice tirato giù? For down, perché non fosse punto di osservazione. Per osserva.
Hey, he said the Germans pushed it down and later put it back up.
Sì, perché non fosse osserva, come si dice, punto di riferimento.
At the highest point, I guess.
Right, so they didn't want the enemy to see it, so they...
Hey Joe. Dimmi.
La signora chiede quelle montagne là.
Allora,
Quelle in fondo.
quelle in fondo è Monte Cimone, is big, 2000, Cimone, 2200. Là dietro, nella foschia, si vede Riva Ridge, Pizzo di Campiano, Cappelbuso, sarà questo.
Ma è l'ultima?
No, allora, il primo, l'ultimo, the last, in fondo è Monte Cimone.
Quello là più alto.
Questa prima qua, dopo Monte Belvedere, è Riva Ridge. Is Jim He's American. He's American.
American.
He's. German.
Oh, German.
And the captain called me up from a reserve position and said, I want you to go down there and take that barn right down there, that farmhouse. And he pointed to it and told me that they were going to support me with fire from the main line out here, where I&K Company were. And I thought, God, we'll never make it across that open field. But I had the last word. I said, yes, sir. And we got our platoon, then about 15 men, and ran down here as fast as we could to take the barn, take the farmhouse. And we got down here with, I think, 12. We lost 3, 1 dead and 2 wounded coming down. And then we secured the house, and there were some prisoners here. When we took the prisoners,
Questo è il marito, eh? Questo l'ho
I
riconosciuto.
got a German Luger from them, we still have that. And then we built foxholes around here and held the building. So we stayed here, I think, 3 or 4 days. Hi, how are you?
Mi riconosce? Come va? Bene, bene, bene. Bene. Che novità! Bella.
We got here, we secured the ground by having a couple of foxholes dug out here around, so we didn't want to be in the building because we'd shell it. So we spread our few men out around, particularly around this way. And I would guess that we'd been here an hour and a half. This was now by the middle of the afternoon, if I recall. And the Germans attacked with a light force, and we drove them off. We stopped them, and they wounded one of our people, if I recall right. And then I think over the next 4 days, they attacked us 3 or 4 more times. It wasn't a serious attack, as they had a delatration, but they just wanted us to get out of here, because really, as long as we held this hill, they couldn't do anything very seriously up on. As long as we held the house, they couldn't do anything very seriously up on the hill. And I remember, I guess there's a window on the other side of this little building, and I was standing there one day, and we could see the Germans come up in broad daylight, so we shot at them. And then at night, the other thing was interesting. One of the counterattacks was at night. This was about the 3rd night, and I was exhausted, as everybody was. So I said, I'm going in and take a break. You guys watch this stove. I was the acting platoon leader, the boss. So we went in here, went upstairs in a double bed. And they started shelling it again. And when the shelling stopped, we came outside, and then we counted who's here, who isn't here. And Sergeant Wesley, a great soldier, who was killed in the bed with me at the same time. That was going to talk. See, the shell hits the top of the roof. It was like the roof hasn't been repaired since then.
Italia. All'America. Ai nostri American Hero. American Hero.
Abbiamo fatto noi? Abbiamo fatto? Sì? Sì?
Alla vostra, grazie di essere qua.
Well, I was there when it was double prime.
Okay.
So I was pretty original. There weren't too many there before.
Well, there must have been a dozen or so you guys that were there in the real
Assomigliano,
Le due sorelle,
assomigliano.
I still have the ridges in my teeth where I chipped my teeth. And every time a dentist wanted to repair it, I said, no, that's my remembrance.
It was difficult. We didn't realize what an advantage the Germans had until we made it to the top. And we looked back down the hill and we could see how open it was. And we just wondered how we ever made it through that terrain. And they, had machine guns firing at us and so forth. So it was a little scary. It was more scary after we got up to the top and looked back than it was during the battle.
We are very honored to meet you in this very special place. We would like to give your president this simple certificate of appreciation. Remember these wonderful days with you. Many thanks to all of you who have fought and died for our freedom. We hope we do not offend you for wearing your uniform, which is not ours. But we believe in the tradition and the glorious values of your army, such as loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. So we thank everybody and arrivederci a presto. Thank you.
In particular, I think just about everybody knows Giovanni Sulla. He is a friend of many of you veterans. He has gone out of his way whenever asked to take to a battle site. He's willing to provide transportation all on his own. He's been with us on his own time. Giovanni, number one.
But I think that the biggest scare we got was later on in the pole, and we're walking, and we're ahead of schedule. These airmen, you got a line, and if you get over that line, they fire. Well, then they come and they fire on us. And when we see them, I'm in the truck, and we saw them. They're flying beautiful because we looked at how nice it looked. They just washed all those planes, nice, shiny in them. And all of a sudden, they start to dip. And when they start to dip at 25, 30 miles an hour, we were getting off that truck already.
See those old abutments on the other side? That was the old bridge. And they blowed the bridge just before we got here. And some of them swam across. Any kind of a board would float to get across the river. They didn't want to surrender to us. But they had anti-aircraft batteries over in this direction, and they were laying their anti-aircraft fire down on top of us when we crossed. We crossed 85th. We were right side by side 87th. The two L companies, 85th L and 87th L, was side by side. There was a captain hollered, L companies, we're crossing. And I grabbed my machine gun and was going to start. Somebody hollered, no, that's not us. And he looked right at me and he said, you're L company, let's go. I got up again, they said, stay down, that's not us. It was 87th L company. My lieutenant used to serve in L Company. He went to Kiska with L Company 87th. Then he went to OCS and come back, and he was in 85th. And I was weapons platoon. He was the weapons officer. So it was so heavy. We had wounded, but I don't know if anybody got killed from it. The good Lord was looking over us, I think, in here.
The Po River, we had a busy time. The Germans had taken their ACAC guns that they'd used for shooting, firing at airplanes, and lowered them so that they were shooting horizontal at us. And those really could do a lot of damage. And we had a number of people there we had to take care of, and kept us busy.
We all marched down to the Po Valley, and there was a kind of a standing joke that we'd been in the Apennines so long on the side hills that one leg was shorter than the other, and all the troops walked in a circle when I got on the flat ground. That was a joke. Through the Po Valley, I can recall walking along the roads, and we walked the whole way up to the Po. And we walked that one day, we walked all day until midnight. And as we went through the little Italian towns and villages, it's May in the Po Valley, or almost May, it's very hot. And the Italians would be there with a large water glass of wine, cool wine. And they would give you the wine as you walked through the village. Well, every village was the same, you know. So we walked until midnight. We were drinking wine most of the day and half the night, you know. We didn't expect to see any of Germans, and they sure didn't want to see us, you know. But we caught up with them at San Benedetto Po. It's about midnight. There was a brief firefight. I don't think anybody got hurt. The Germans crossed the river, and I think the interesting part of it was most of our battalion was probably inebriated, you know. Of course, the next day we had to cross the Po River. And that was interesting too, because when we came up to the Po, the enemy was using time fire artillery, which is artillery that has a time fuse that's set to burst a certain distance or a certain time out of the gun. And it burst right overhead, so it's really very vicious, you know. And they were leveling this time fire in on us. Of course, everybody was down as flat as they could be in a very flat field, and nobody wanted to move, you know, but we still had to cross the river. I can remember looking around and seeing this gentleman come up, and I think he had a couple of revolvers, one on each hip, and it was General Hayes, the division commander, and his aide. His aide was probably pretty scared, you know. And Hayes said, "Come on, you know, we're going to cross the river. Let's go." Everybody got up and went.
It was quite an experience to lead a mule up the mountain. And again, being an artilleryman, you had a mule in front of you and you could grab his tail and he'd help you up the mountain.
How'd the mule like that?
Well, he didn't mind. If you could stand the smell, it was okay.
And then farther up the line, near the end, I was climbing up this mountain to the monastery on top. Standing on top of here was a monk in his white robe, beard, black, gray beard. I thought it was the Lord himself. We were running up this plowed field, and we had the built-in pack, and he felt something warm going down his back. He thought sure that he was hit. Took off his jacket, and all it was oil from his rifle. That oil can was trickling down his fanny.
We set sail for Italy in January of 1945. We arrived about 9 days later in Naples. We rode up the Italian peninsula in Italian boxcars. One thing we learned as we went through the small towns, all of the Italian girls, when they wave hello, they go like this, and we thought, what a country.
What does that mean?
That means hello. We didn't think it meant that, but that's what it means, hello.
It sounds so fantastic, but it really happened. We were stationed up behind us, way up there in the below River Ridge, you know. Well, this one day the battalion commander came up. His name was Colonel Gus Nations. He was a reach red officer. Well, like I said, even when we were in training in the United States, Gus was always a joker. He got a nickname of Gopher. Well, this the one day he came up to our position with an artillery spotter. And the colonel was looking through glasses, the binoculars, and he saw some activity going on over in Belvedere, you know, in the town. And he asked, what was this activity there, men going in and out of the place? And I says, you mean you don't know, sir? And he says, no. I says, it's the German John. I asked him also, are you going to do what I think you're going to do? And he says, yeah. I mean, it sounded funny, but it wasn't funny to the last guy that went in there. Well, he got the coordinates, and it was a lucky shot. But I was looking through my binoculars, and, well, I might use one or two words. That poor bastard, when he walked in the door, all you could see a blur following him behind him. And so the colonel blew up the entire German. I won't say, well, I'll say at the shit house.
We were not only fighting the enemy, but we were fighting disease, with particularly the hepatitis. We lost our medical officer, Captain Ray Fricky, because he picked up hepatitis and had to go back and be treated for it. And I had a brief bout with it. I was laid up in bed for a week there at vomiting, high fever, and so forth. And it was a lot of people came down with hepatitis, and particularly on the German side, I understand that they were sort of devastated by it.
And at that first tunnel along Lake Garda, or eastern coast, which was blown up by the Germans, we sat there on a cold, dreary, overcast day over several hours until the ducks were brought up. When they finally were brought up, we boarded and just went around the blown out area and landed on the road again. It took us several hours to get the entire company across and around. Now, Nago was a big battle for the 86 B Company. We lost several men, and there was a bomb that was dropped on one of the mountainsides, and it was never truly determined which Air Force dropped that. One of the gentlemen on the bus said it was a German airplane, but I don't think Germany had any air corps left. So it could very well have been an American plane by mistake, friendly fire. But at any rate, several of my good friends were involved in that tragedy, and it was to the point where nothing could be identified. It was just a bunch of rubble.
Okay, my best estimate that the bombing took place about 50 yards beyond that building up towards the mountain.
The small building out there
That
looks like
small building.
a tool shed.
Yeah, and just maybe 50 yards or so up towards the mountain from that tool shed is where the bombing and those casualties took place.
The 1st Battalion went east of the lake and north and came down into Nago. And there's a shelf, and apparently they came down right up in that high saddle, coming down this way. I said, remember, you were marching this way, there was no roads. and in that field the bombing occurred. So that was this was a real mountain trooper action. That's not a trivial hike to rise up the cliffs above the lake, go around a mountain called Dosso Cassina, and coming down and attacking the town of Nago. So that's the 1st Battalion of the 86. The same guys that took Riva Ridge. Not a bad outfit.
Yeah. And
I don't know about
General
that.
Hayes' idea, I think, of trying to outflank Torbo. He felt the main defense was going to be at Riva and Torbole, so that this was an attempt to outflank the strong defenses in those places. And that's why this operation took place.
The General Hayes, they wanted to get to the Brenner Pass and stop their overall goal. They wanted to cut off the Germans before they got to the Brenner Pass and got back home. There was a concern, whether it was true or not, that the Germans would have a redoubt, a defensive redoubt, and would hold out for a long time. To the extent that that was a real threat, nobody knows. I don't know now, but at least it was a threat that they believed then. And the idea was to stop the Germans from getting back to the homeland. And so the objective was to get up to the Brenner Pass. Fortunately, the war was over here.
An officer came through and said any Jewish soldier who wanted a pass to celebrate Passover could get one. So naturally I accepted the pass right out of the foxhole, got a ride to Florence, got a clean uniform, went to the airport, flew to Rome, and met a friend of mine who was invited to a Passover service held by a Polish family who left Poland when the Nazis came in, went to France when the Nazis came in, and then finally went to Rome, where they were left pretty much alone. And the service, the Passover service, which is really the Last Supper, we call it a Seder, and a feast, was just like my father would have performed back home in Rhode Island.
After getting word to move our headquarters company into Nago, we switched back down the mountainside and passed the spot where what was left of the bodies lay. Blood and bits of bone and flesh and sheds of clothing lay scattered over the ground. Someone had made a partial attempt to clean up. Along the trail there was a gunny sack of arms and legs with the grisly ends sticking out. No bodies or heads were visible. We surmised that they had been simply blown apart. This is the thing that gnaws at your heart. Yet in war we have been hardened. Without a tear, we hurried on to get by this awful spot, silently thankful that it had not been our time to die.
F Company 86, we walked up through the rubble of every tunnel except one, which we could not get through. One of the tunnels we went in at before daybreak, standing on top of the rubble, and I felt something that wasn't rock under my feet. Well, we were going to move out at daybreak, and as soon as it was light enough, I could see these dead bodies that were there, that they'd blown up inside the tunnel of dead Germans. And I hear there was horses there too.
88s. You could hear them come in, and a lot of times you couldn't hear them, but you'd hit the ground, my knees, and my face was also sore, but black and blue all over from concussion. And when we hit Lake LaGuardia in the second tunnel, I woke up in the next morning and here were Germans laying right around. They were hit, and I just was lucky. And that was the second tunnel going through on Lake LaGuardia.
So what happened was that they got some of the ducks up from where they had crossed the Po with and brought them up, and the whole Company G was told that they were going to be putting the ducks and go out and come around the tunnels, and we came out and came in between tunnel 3 and 4, and but while we were out there, of course they were shooting at us like crazy, and all I could think of was, with all the gear that we had and everything, even though you may personally not have been hit, if the duck had been hit and had a sink, there was not a darn thing you could do but go straight to the bottom, just because of all the weight you had on yourself. And in that kind of weather, you couldn't swim in that water anyhow.
We were on the east side of Lake Garda, and kind of a funny experience. We were at the a chateau there, a big chateau, or if you want to call it. And of course, the first thing we do is look for the wine cellar. And we went down, and there were these huge casks, 8-10 feet tall, and on the windowsill was a revolver. And so we didn't have out any guns. We took the revolver, and the next thing we knew, this Italian came off the top of the things. Niente fascista, he wasn't a fascist, and so we took him upstairs and gave him to the officers. Later on, they decided that they wanted a wire crew up in Torboli, or Riva, and they took us, our whole weapons carrier and whole crew, and put us onto a duck, and we started up the lake, and partway up the lake, our duck started to throw sparks, and we were all ready to go, because we knew that the B battery men had gone down the night before and lost 16, 18 people on board. And so, and I had gotten in the cab with the driver of the duck, and there was a life preserver there. It's the only one that was aboard, and I managed to put that on, so that I was going to float.
That's an advantage, man. It was. We're lagging behind, guys. I know we are. Yeah, like that. Just stay up there.
Yeah, Bill.
By noon of the 29th, our troops entered Torboli. The Germans continued strong resistance with artillery, tanks, and machine guns until late into the night. But the Tet continued the attack, and Torboli was ours by the morning of April 30th. Later that morning, Colonel Darby arrived in Torboli to confer with the 86th Regiment staff about the next phase of the campaign. Where do we go? After the meeting, he stepped outside the command post, here along the waterfront, pausing before climbing back into his jeep. A German 88 shell hit nearby, producing fragments that killed Colonel Darby and Sergeant Major John Evans of the 86th. Darby and Evans were among the last of the 10th Mountain Troopers to be killed in Italy. 6 other soldiers were killed earlier that same day in Torboli and Nago. But more deaths were to follow. In the early evening, a duck headed across the lake towards Riva de Garda, and on board were a driver from the 52nd Quartermaster Battalion, PFC Nicholas Del Grosso, and 25 men from B and C batteries of the 605 Field Artillery. The duck was heavily loaded, and there was a storm brewing. The boat capsized and sank. Corporal Thomas Ho was the only survivor. Darby's record shows he had survived many battles in World War II. But it was God's will that he should end his Army career with the 10th Mountain. Colonel Darby was posthumously promoted to the grade of Brigadier General.
He occupied the residence of Mussolini, which was Il Duce, and the Lago di Garda. Now, this villa belonged to a man named Feltrinelli, and we crossed the lake the morning of April 30th. Now, I'll tell you what happened. We crossed on the I think a dozen of ducks, D-U-K-W. These are, what they are, yeah. I don't want you to think that we crossed the lake on Canadian geese. And as we were crossing, even though it was a moonless night, we could be silhouetted on the lake very easily. As we crossed, we got halfway across, we had an observer in our amphibian, and it was a major. So as we were getting close, he just stood up in the middle of the boat. We were all down because we expect fight at any time. And he was standing up and look over and so on. So some soldiers said, "We'll wait until we get close to the shore. He'll be the first one to be knocked off." But we were fortunate the German had left.
We landed on this side up above Gargnano and set up a roadblock. And then when we learned from the Italians that the Germans had fled over the hill at dusk to get away, we then started marching down to town. And just before we got to town, they told us to go over and take this over this building. We go down, and it turns out to be Mussolini's villa, which we had no idea until then, until we got in it, that it was. And we all took turns sleeping in Mussolini's bed, because it was easy to determine which one it was. It had a four-poster, very nice room. And he had a total of 35 bedrooms we counted in that villa. And there was no one there when we arrived. He had already fled and eventually got caught by the partisans, of course, and killed. We stayed there quite some time, which was close to 3 weeks, as I remember. In any event, the war ended actually while we were still there, so we didn't go any further north.
Well, this is Limoni de Garda.
Oh, it is.
The next one is Riva de Garda.
And of course, being 20, we had to test the water. And so I can still remember that it's just like somebody hitting you with a baseball bat,
I heard you still like cold water.
Oh, and I had to try it, the first morning we were here. And I was going to swim from there to there. I went in, and I could not breathe. I had to get out, Yeah, it was cold, and it still is cold. You think after all these years it would warm up.
I have a very memorable war-related experience. It was the day after the fighting had stopped. And I went with General Ruffner's party to Bolzano, 50 miles behind the German lines, because General Ruffner had to go up and apparently try to arrange some surrender terms. They'd gotten a ceasefire, but there was no official surrender, you see, and General Ruffner's responsibility was to go up there. Well, when we got up there, of course, we went by jeep and by car, and there were thousands and thousands of armed Germans all around, and it was kind of harrowing. We didn't know for sure that they'd all gotten the message to stop fighting. And when we got there, one memorable thing was watching General Ruffner get out of his car, staff car, and walk through this phalanx of high-ranking German generals, and they were all standing there stiffly at attention, giving him the Hitler salute. General Ruffner didn't look left nor right, nor did he return any salutes. He always walked with his head up in the air like that.
Anyhow, and he just stalked past those people right into the High German headquarters. It was just like a movie, absolutely like seeing a World War II movie, and only we were there, you know.
The cold and the training that we had, I think that they were a closer knit outfit than some of the other outfits. And we went through a lot because up in the mountains we had double rations, and we needed them too. But I don't know. It could be that it was a better bunch of guys, or it could be just that we got along better.
Through of capturing, River Ridge and Belvedere. From then on, it opened up the region a little bit because it took away the control the Germans had over our approaches. So once that happened, it didn't take very long to get into the Bow Valley.
We did contribute a lot of young energy to a stalemated and a tired front. I think that the front was very tired. I think all the units had been pretty well played out. And when we came out full of pea and vinegar, I think it re-energized the whole front, or at least the U.S. side of it. I can't speak for the English, but yeah, I think that was our major contribution, and the fact that we were able to move through the mountains so swiftly. I know that the Germans mentioned that in Truscott's book or Clark's book. He mentions the fact that the Germans marveled at our ability to move through the mountains.